Welcome to Cheques and Balances. I'm Michael Vincent. This is James Blair. And today's topic, how to get your kids on the property ladder.
So a common theme of these episodes, Mike, is the questions that we get most frequently.
Yep.
And one we talk about a lot is, James, I want to be financially free, I want early retirement, I want to pay off my mortgage. And right up the top of the list as well is, can I help my kids? How do I help my kids? Giving them the head start I didn't have is something that's important to me.
Yeah, and it's something that we hear on the mortgage side of things as well quite a bit. It's how can I help my kids take that first step into home ownership, and what does that look like, and what is the process? So, today we'll sort of cover off both sides of that. So from James's side, it'll be more around, what does that mean for the parents financially? How does that impact them? And what is a reasonable amount of help to give? And, what does that sort of do to impact the child's attitude towards finances and their financials over the long term? Whereas I'll cover off more around practically how can you help your kids actually achieve that goal and get into the house.
Yeah, I think it's important to start by saying you don't have to do this. You don't have to feel like everybody needs to help their kids. If you're in a position and you're fortunate enough to do it, that's great. But it's not something that everybody has to. I talked about university fees, helping with the first home, sometimes private schooling for those that feel value in private schooling as well. So I kind of include those withdrawals in the projections that I do. But I mean, one thing you do have to keep in mind is if there's a little Michael walking around tomorrow, and that little Michael wants a house in 25 years. If houses go up at 5% a year, that's going to be a very expensive first home deposit. Yeah,
it is. And I guess as those deposits get larger and more expensive, parents want to step in there and try and provide that that certainty or get them into the house over a shorter period of time. So, from my side, there's essentially three different ways that we cover that off. It looks like guaranteeing on the loan, going as joint borrowers, or gifting. So I'll cover that off.
Yeah, the things that I think about when it comes to helping the kids is firstly, do not help your kids sacrificing your own future. So if you're maybe the guarantor on a mortgage and there's no financial impact, you can decide whether you can trust little Jimmy or not. But I see a lot of parents who, not a lot is probably too harsh, but there's certainly quite a few that I deal with where they've done too much.
Yeah.
And I find there's this paradox, Mike, which neither of us are parents, but I deal with the parents a lot and I see the implications with their children, just like how I'm not elderly, but I probably know more about retirement than any 50 or 60-year-old does. The paradox I find around helping your kids is growing your wealth. A big part of it is you want to share the love, right?
Yeah.
You want to help get your kids ahead. You want to give them the things that you didn't have, but if you give them too much or it comes too easy, they don't have that grit, they don't have that heart, that work ethic, and there will be exceptions to the rule, and this comes down to parenting a lot, but helping without going too far is a really important rule. How do you teach kids about the value of money?
Yeah. Okay, James, so let's put that into context then. So if I have children, I do want to help them out in the future, and I'm thinking about this early, what is the best way to save, to help them out?
Okay, so if we're talking like a newborn and we want to kind of contribute a little bit away. Okay, so firstly, time is your best friend. So you do not want to be putting this money into a savings account earning 0.1% for the next 25 years. You're wanting to be thinking about the benefits of compounding interest. And the idea behind compounding interest is that the returns will outweigh your contributions over a certain period of time. So if you are thinking about, I've got an example here where if you put $10 a week into an index fund, index fund, covered it in the last episode, Shares 101, but a basket of companies, that might give you a 10% return per annum. If you do that $10 a week for 20 years, you're probably looking at $40,000 that you can help your kids with, inflation adjusted.
Yeah, so that's actually a really substantial amount for people looking to get into new builds, especially. That's sort of half a deposit there for a 2-bedroom house in Auckland. So yeah, that's a really nice amount. So that's over the long term. Over the shorter term, there are sort of different ways that you can do it. We have some customers who borrow money against their own properties and gift it to their kids. And that is a strategy, but there's sort of two things you need to think about there. And the first one is, what does the repayments look like for you? And can you afford this, and over what period of time are you going to repay it back? If you're 50, if you're 65, and you're taking out another 50K, 100K, something like that, you are going to have to pay that off in a relatively short amount of time, and it is going to impact your cash flow.
Yeah. So, we've spoken about little Jimmy just being born. How about when little Jimmy is, hopefully got a job, maybe 25 or 30, and I'm in a financial position to help my son or my daughter.
Yep.
What's the first step? Say I know I've got the financial backing behind me, I'm comfortable making the decision. What are the different ways we can cut it? How do we make it work?
So the first step is to decide how you're going to do it. And I sort of mentioned before, there's three options. I'll cover the first one because it's pretty quick to cover off. The banks aren't really in favor of that so much anymore since the Responsible Lending Act. And that is guaranteeing the loan. So that's providing, a statement that says, in the instance that little Jimmy can't repay this loan, I'm going to step in and make the repayments, and the onus is on me, and I have the liability. Banks aren't in favor of this so much anymore, so it's not something we usually advise clients, because essentially you're shouldering a lot of the risk with not a lot of return there. And like I said, over those shorter time periods to retirement, it's just not the flavour of the month at the moment with the banks.
Well, we saw that with the Royal Commission in Australia, which, for those that don't know, there was a review of the financial services industry in Australia where they were finding that, Mary, in 75, was losing her home because she was backing a child's mortgage that she really didn't know what was going on or was doing too much.
Yeah, exactly. And the last thing the banks actually want to do is sell a house out from underneath someone who is 65, 50, sort of a little bit later in their financial life, that they were potentially going to live in and see out their days, right? It's something that the banks just don't want to do. So guaranteeing the loan, not really.
We're not doing that?
Yeah, we wouldn't recommend it.
So what's option two, Mike?
So the other two options the one I covered just before is gifting. So, this is probably the most common option, and that involves the parents gifting, some of the deposit, or all of, not all of the deposit, but usually some of the deposit to their children. The banks require, a gifting certificate that says that this isn't a loan, it's not interest bearing, you don't have to repay it back. So, little Jimmy isn't going to be making those loan repayments as well as, the mortgage repayments. It's a very straightforward process. The advantage of it, it's very easy to do in terms of from the bank side of things. The disadvantage, you're giving all that money away and you get nothing financially in return usually, right? Unless you draw up some kind of contract or something like that. So you're essentially just giving it away and not expecting anything back.
You get a smile on little Jimmy's face. Isn't that priceless?
You do. It is. So that's definitely the easiest way you can go about this. The third option there is going as co-borrowers on the loan. So what that means is essentially you would all be in the same pool. You would do a lending application like your child would as well. You're potentially going to be owning the house along with your child. And that sort of helps in two different scenarios. One is if they need the deposit, and two, if they need some income help as well, if they're borrowing by themselves or they're a little bit younger that haven't built up such a strong income yet, that can sort of help to get them along the house purchasing track as well.
So with that third option, say I go, I'm going to help them out, but I don't really want it to be my house. It's not my asset. I'm just trying to help them get ahead. What's the out? How do I get to a point where they are in the house by themselves?
Yeah, so it's actually important to think about that exit strategy every time you're looking to help them, whether that is gifting or something else. If something's going on in the background, they are paying it back. Is what does that timeline look like? Is it 5 years? Is it 10 years? How do we get out of this? How does the ownership structure? What does that look like? And quite often it can simply be that they will take over the mortgage repayments in the future once their income is sort of risen to a level that is acceptable, or maybe they've got a partner and they have joint incomes. And then you can essentially buy your parents out of the house.
Yeah. And can you just do that as like a $0 sale if the parents aren't wanting to financially?
Yeah, well, in that instance, you wouldn't be buying them out so much as you would just be taking over the mortgage.
Yeah.
Then no cash would essentially change hands there.
Great. So of those three options, guaranteeing, which we don't do anymore.
Yep.
Number two is a gift, where just a straight exchange for here's some cash, and they'll have the servicing sorted by themselves.
Yep.
And number three is doing it together with some sort of exit strategy at some point.
Exactly.
Yep. Great. So that's about how to help your kids into your first home. One other really important thing I'd like to talk about is this podcast, and kind of what we do here is all about financial literacy. I'd really encourage you as well to think about when we talk about helping your kids get ahead, it's not about helping them down the road. Think about their financial literacy as well. So we don't teach financial literacy in schools or in most schools. And if they're not learning at schools, the only other person they've really got to learn from is you.
Yep.
So how can you show your kids good financial literacy? Well, firstly, being a model.
Yep.
So saving for things you want to buy, good practices around debt. So not, borrowing money on cars or, higher purchases where you're paying
Holidays, yeah.
interest rates. And also teach them about work ethic behind money as well. Chores, if you want to contribute towards a car or their first home, making sure they've got some sweat in the game as well. They're saving as well.
Yep.
Great. Okay. Well, so we'll wrap it up there. Just another reminder, if you've got any questions, a topic you'd be interested in us talking about, please send them through and we'll see you next week.
Cheers.